The greatest treasure in the known galaxy is out there.
Well, friends, here we are, the final season of Star Trek Discovery, Season 5, Episode 1, the premiere. This one is entitled Red Directive. Now, I do know 2 episodes dropped. I'm only talking about Episode 1. In fact, I've only watched Episode 1, so you may already be ahead of the game on where things are going. You've been warned, there are spoilers ahead. Let's crack into it. So Season 5 picks up a few months later from Season 4, I think. We do get some acknowledgements like Book and Michael haven't spoken in a few months. They've already mothballed the Spore Drive plan after the whole 10C thing, which is a little bit interesting. It doesn't factor really into the story here so much, but they do acknowledge the fact that Discovery will be a unique ship, the only one in the fleet with a Spore Drive, because they're moving ahead with the Pathway Drive that hasn't been fully explored within the show so far. And that's something that does present a little bit of a decent showcase here. I've been a little bit wishy-washy on how far into the future Discovery was flung at the end of Season 2. It makes for a good break from continuity to kind of set up its own stage. But by being so far into the future, anything that they can imagine will either feel wildly too similar to the technology that we're accustomed to in Star Trek, but also if they go too far in the other direction, it's just going to be incomprehensible magic, for lack of a better term. And they have done sort of an okay job with the programmable matter. That's something that seems significantly far ahead of what we know. But a lot of the stuff just kind of feels like it's stagnated for a century. They're still using, in essence, photon torpedoes and phasers. Yes, I know they're a little bit better and a little bit souped up. However, going on a little bit of a tangent here, I do think that kind of speaks to the containment within one galaxy. There was no real need to expand and develop and evolve outside of a certain format when everything in the Federation, well, not even in the Federation, everything within the Milky Way kind of conforms to the same generic shape and the generic technology. So there's no real need to quantum leap into the future to develop all of these newfangled way of doing things when what you have is effective against what you also have next to you, keeping up with the Joneses. Again, I know this is a tangent, and based on the storyline we're seeing in this season and a little bit with the whole 10C stuff from last season, I'm kind of cautiously optimistic that we're going to see this kick in the pants to Starfleet, the Federation, all of these species we know within the universe, galaxy, I should say, to kind of take that next step. Now, I know this is the end of Discovery, so the only real way we'll see that in the future is through Academy, but we'll have to see where they go with that. Overall, I thought that this episode did a pretty decent job of keeping up the pace. Now, there wasn't much of that sitting down and having quiet conversations. There were a couple of scenes throughout the episode where we get that. The one that worked best, in my opinion at least, is when Saru and the Navarre president actually get engaged and decide to take things to the next level.
Codify our mutual commitment in a more official capacity.
And this is coming off the back of Saru getting offered the ambassadorship, I guess it would be called, so he would have to effectively leave Starfleet, leave his family on the Discovery, and he comes to this conclusion because of the events of the episode. That and the little party scene at the beginning after the flashback scene with all the action were really the only quiet moments we had in this episode, and they didn't stop long enough to give us the ability or the time to really digest what's going on. They just kept going and going and going. And I think for Discovery, which tends to lean a little bit away from the technobabble and a little bit more towards the power of love and power of friendship, I think that works best because it doesn't give you the time to sit with all of the things that are happening and really overanalyze and overthink them. Sure, you'll have time to do that later, but this episode, I think, struck a pretty good balance. I also think, for the most part, the new characters introduced in this episode were pretty well done.
Meet Maul and Locke.
We didn't get a heck of a lot of time to actually sit with them and get to learn their personalities and who they are, but for what they're supposed to represent to this season, the morally gray, not really bad guys, just on the other side of what we're trying to accomplish, that seems like the roguish element they're supposed to be. I think that they worked well for this, although we do know they're from the Firefly universe.
Whatever's here must be extra shiny.
Well, shiny.
And we also know there's something wonky going on with Locke when he takes his helmet off.
Smells like a tomb in here.
That could mean he's some sort of proto-being like a changeling, which would make sense considering Locke sound familiar. Also, the same actress played the changeling female from DS9 and the progenitor female from TNG's The Chase. Or it could be he's using some sort of altering technology similar to what I speculated in my video on who Locke might be, linked here. I have to say that probably the best new character introduced here, which leads me to wonder how long he's going to last before he gets shuffled off and killed or something, considering that seems to be what they do with all of the breakout standout characters. Shaw, Hemmer, I could go on. So I'm really hoping this Captain Raynor character lasts throughout the season.
I love the feeling of interrupting something.
Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. Like and subscribe. If he does die, I've seen a lot of people speculating that he's probably going to die before the season is out. We're not getting any more Discovery, so all that really does is take him out of the equation for teaching at the academy or something. I guess I could live with that since we're not probably going to be spending much more time in this setting as far as it seems. The real crux and the real meat of all of this is that deep connection to Star Trek TNG, the Chase episode with the progenitors as they're being called.
Jean-Luc Picard found a message left by a race of ancient beings. They created life as we know it.
Life as in?
Every humanoid species in the galaxy.
And that seems to be the entire plot of this season. I like the fact that we've got this revelation in this episode, and they didn't really mystery box what the thing is. They could have very easily kept us in the dark, like with the Red Angel, or even, the 10C, or to a lesser extent, what caused the burn. So by giving us most of the information up front and acting throughout this episode like that was going to be kept from us until Michael gets that explanation 3/4 of the way through the episode, I think that's a good way to handle it, and then we'll fill in the blanks as we go. So finally, 5 seasons in, I think they're not going to be just hanging this dangling carrot over our heads for the rest of the season. I think there are still going to be mysteries that have to be solved, and based on that trailer at the end of the season, it looks like they're going to be tying in a lot of other TNG elements from these past races or species or planets we've encountered, possibly not even just TNG, but other Star Trek lore. So it looks like they're going to start connecting a lot of the ancient ethereal races out there. Ethereal was not the right word, but I can't think of it right now. And if that's the case, I just hope they do a much better job than the way they kind of shoehorned the supervisors and the travelers together, which, by the way, I don't dislike. I actually like these two being linked together. Just the way they did it was so off the cuff and just kind of like, oh, these are two things, let's throw them together. They didn't spend enough time really building that up to feel like a genuine connection. It was just like, here's a Trek thing, here's a Trek thing. We haven't used either of them in a while. They're the same. On the other side of the coin, from what I mentioned earlier, the whole non-stop breakneck kind of pace this episode had with a couple of breakup moments, that led to a lot of fun and interesting elements. But to me, I'm not always the biggest fan of the action elements being thrown in Star Trek. They're a cool occasionally, especially when we don't see them too often. But we had two really high-octane elements. The very beginning with that whole kind of heist situation with Michael being caught on the outside of the ship, trying to disable it and capture them. That was a long, pretty decent space kind of element. But then we had that really, really extended kind of sand speeder thing where they were trying to capture them on the planet. Both of these elements, in and of themselves, could have made for a fun action scene, but by kind of combining them together in this very first episode, it just felt a little bit like overkill to me. And I know your mileage will vary on that. If you're the type of person that loves these action sequences, then you'll probably love having so much of them in one episode. But for me, I think one of them would have sufficed to make the point they were trying to tell. Oh, I almost forgot to mention the other new character.
I am Fred.
Apparently based on Data Soong type android.
Alton Soong.
Not really sure how he's going to factor into the season overall. He was effectively killed in this episode and they copied his brain, but he is on the Discovery and I have to imagine they will reactivate him soon. Again, I haven't seen episode 2, so for all I know, he's walking and talking in that episode and you're all kind of like, well, duh, we know that happens. We got Tilly back and I have to say, Her little quote on what Starfleet means to her in the trailer sounded really hokey, and it's like, oh my god, they're throwing this in here like it's this grand statement that she's making. It wasn't actually that way in the show.
Being a part of a crew, being where you need to be, when you need to be, that's Starfleet.
It's a conundrum, yeah.
She was just kind of talking to this person after a party while she was drunk. So I have to say, I actually like how that was played, and I think the way they put it in the trailer kind of turned some people off. Similar to how Worf saying he was a pacifist in the Picard trailer turned people off when that was taken wildly out of context to how it was actually used in the show. Again, I have to say, I like the way they're using Kovich in this.
Apologies for intruding on what I'm sure was an invigorating evening.
He seems to now be taking on more of a role of, oh, let's say Cecil from Invincible.
That's enough. Lights.
What? And the elusive man from Mass Effect.
Commander Shepard.
Kind of cramming those together. So far as they're using imagery, which is really intrinsically tied to these characters.
Dr. Kovich.
So I have to imagine he's going to play a more pivotal role, and hopefully we get some more backstory on who he is. He is saying he is working for people above him. He is not the one in charge. I really hope to God it's not shown that it's a newfangled version of Section 31 or something, but I wouldn't be surprised if it is. We get shoutouts to Tholians and the Breen here, so we know they're still kicking around because they are the elements out there that are working against the Federation, or I suppose there are elements out there that aren't at least on the side of the Federation, so the galaxy as a whole has not been unified yet. Another thing that felt like an actual addressing of the fan criticism is they gave all of the bridge crew, if not just a couple of lines, something to do, to the fact that a couple of them even went on an away mission. Not that it worked out, not that they had much to do once they were over there, but it was nice to see them trying to utilize the sometimes subjugated to the background, sometimes the almost always subjugated to the background characters. Overall, I think this is a fairly strong outing for the first episode of a Discovery season. If you don't like Discovery, this is not going to be the episode which suddenly makes you come to it and love it, but I think that it's definitely addressing a lot of the criticisms we've seen while still trying to maintain its own identity and trying to keep what it is that the fans of it actually do like. But I think the thing that's either going to make or break this season is how well executed and how interesting this treasure hunt is going to be. Unlike the other seasons, it's not going to be a build-up to this grand revelation at the end. Yes, there is going to be a grand revelation at the end. That is pretty obvious, but at least we know what we're trying to do, and each episode can maintain a sort of pseudo-episodic element while we go on this treasure hunt, while building up to the whole. And I just hope that's what's going to keep driving this season. It could fall off for all I know, but it seems like that's what they're trying to do now. They're going to keep that momentum building and just thrust us towards the finish line instead of spending a lot of time kind of meandering and then suddenly spilling all the beans when we're 2 episodes from the end. What did you think of this episode? Where do you think we're going with this season? How many specific call-outs to past TNG or past Star Trek did you see? Leave all those things down below. Like, share, subscribe to all those fancy YouTube things. But until next time...
What are you waiting for?
Let's fly.